Biblical worldview tells the story of reality. Every worldview, I argue, has to answer 4 questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? What's gone wrong in the world? Is there any hope? And where's all this headed? Now, the biblical worldview answers that with the biblical meta-narrative: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. Research we've done at Family Research Council with George Barna shows that although 51% of Americans think they have a biblical worldview, it's actually only 6% when you measure people's beliefs and behaviors. Within the church, 81% of evangelical church attenders will tell you they think they have a biblical worldview. Again, when you measure it for belief and practice, it's only 21%. Better than 6%, but I don't think many pastors would be excited that only 1 in 5 people that's sitting there in the pews actually looks at all of life through the lens of Scripture.
Western society has slowly been slipping away from holding to a biblical worldview. But it seems like more and more, today's culture wants to completely eradicate God.
The removal of any form of affirmation of God, whether it's a prayer before a football game or a prayer before class, which really is minimal. The removal of the Christian worldview in the various liberal arts and sciences has been far more distressing than the removal of prayer. Simply because we're talking about the systematic eradication of a Christian way of thinking. But the result of all of that has been that we now have what C.S. Lewis called a race of educated barbarians.
When a culture rejects God, it simultaneously rejects both morality and absolute truth.
I heard a very famous television personality in the United States the other day congratulate a group of women for speaking your truth, telling people your truth. And I thought this is really, in a sense, the nadir of a movement that has taken place in the West, much of it actually in the United States, that in effect you make up your own truth. And of course the problem with that is that your truth may not coalesce with my truth. And at the end of the day, you've always got to decide what the truth is.
A society without absolute truth inevitably leads to chaos.
Our culture is collapsing for this very reason, that we no longer have shared values. We used to have a core of values that we all basically agreed on. We all agreed that there was something like truth. We disagreed on how to get to absolute truth. But today, there is such a collapse of our culture that we can't even agree that objective truth is possible. So I have my truth and you have your truth. And the only way to settle the issue then is who has the most power. That's exactly what has happened in our society. Power has taken the role that truth used to have.
Our kids are swimming in a cultural soup that's telling them, there's no truth really out there. It's just whatever you think works for you. Cobble together your worldview, maybe pick a little bit from Buddhism, pick a little bit from the New Age, throw in a few Bible verses, maybe some self-help books, and maybe some, do the work, and maybe you can cobble together an idea of life that actually works for you. I think they're going to see the utter chaos that all of this radical gender theory, rejection of truth, live your truth, all of this, they're going to see the fallout from that.
This atheistic worldview has led to human life being completely devalued.
Biblical worldview is going to give us a concept that, there's a distinction between creator and creation, and that the creation was intended by God. There's intention, there's purpose, and that humanity is made in God's image and therefore has inherent value and dignity. What a Darwinian evolution perspective is going to do is say that humanity is not necessarily the crown jewel of creation, but is the result of natural selection and random mutations. And what our Darwinian evolution ethic is going to do, it's going to strip mankind of that inherent dignity that we have.
we are seeing skyrocketing levels of depression and suicide among young people, and I'm sure that there are lots of different factors. I think as our society erodes categories of male-female, fathers not being in the home, I think we have an epidemic of fatherlessness that's contributing to a lot of that. I think there's the rejection of truth when we don't have solid categories by which to live our lives, where there are objective realities like justice and truth and beauty and goodness to anchor into and to depend on. It can lead to hopelessness.
The rejection of a biblical worldview has also led to lawlessness that we are now seeing throughout our society.
When the state no longer acknowledges God, it may not realize this, but it really has no basis for morality. It has no basis to be able to make laws except arbitrarily. Now, what we need to do is to help this society to see that if we have morality, it is ultimately rooted in God. You cannot have such a thing even as free-floating reason. Even reason itself, and many atheists will not recognize this immediately, even reason itself assumes the existence of God. But once God is no longer acknowledged, what you have is man on his own. And what that means is we have arbitrary morality, we have arbitrary truth, and these arbitrary ideas lead to destruction.
I think Isaiah chapter 59 diagnoses it well. You know, Isaiah's confronting the sinfulness in the nation of Judah. The first thing he says is that, you know, it's not as if the Lord's arms have become short in our day. The Lord's arms are not short to save. It's because man's sinfulness has caused a wedge between God and man. The next immediate observation Isaiah makes is that the consequences of that is that truth has fallen in the streets. Men are no longer lovers of truth. When you have that rejection of truth, we shouldn't be surprised when lawlessness ascending accompanies that rejection of truth.
Erasing the biblical worldview is part and parcel of a much larger plan by those who seek to see the great institutional pillars of Western society ultimately collapse.
In some of our Western cultures, there are two powerful influences. One is the whole movement to destroy the biblical teaching on man as the image of God, made as male and female. And the other is the increasing totalitarianism of governments. So one of the signs of that, I think we certainly see in the country in which I live, is the invasion of governments into what is the sphere of the family.
In all of this chaos, the next generation needs to be on high alert and be ready to fight back against a culture in decay.
I think, 75% of the battle is with critical thinking, just teaching kids what these definitions of these words are. What is truth? How do we spot fallacious thinking? But ultimately, there's no perfect plan to make them totally bulletproof. I think, each kid's going to walk their path, and we can do the best we can to equip them. But I think such an important thing is to just live out the real Christian faith in front of them. I just have great hope that God is laying the seedbed to really bring a great revival. We got to get back to truth. We got to get back to some of these good categories, get back to our purpose. What are we as humans? Why did God put us here?